Hey guys, tonight we plunge you into the dusty, chaotic whirlwind of the age of the Crusades, where faith, ambition, and sheer stubbornness collide in a medieval mess you're about to navigate. Picture this. You're standing on a rocky hill in 1096, the sun baking your skin, the air thick with the shouts of frenzied pilgrims and the clank of rusted armour. Horses snort, banners flap in the wind, and somewhere a preacher's voice booms about divine glory. It's the First Crusade, and you, my friend, are woefully unprepared for the madness ahead. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this, not with your modern sensibilities and zero sword skills. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I'm curious where you're drifting off from tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're not just a bystander, you're dropped right into the heart of the First Crusade, a sprawling, messy expedition sparked by Pope Urban II's fiery speech in 1095 at Clermont. He called for Christians to reclaim Jerusalem from Muslim control, promising spiritual rewards and, let's be honest, a chance at loot and land. You're surrounded by a ragtag mix of nobles, knights and peasants, all buzzing with a wild mix of devotion and greed. The air smells of sweat, horse dung and desperation. You're trying to keep up, your boots sinking into the muddy path as you march toward Constantinople, the first major stop. The road is a churned up mess from thousands of feet, and you're already regretting not packing better shoes. Mainstream fact: the First Crusade, launched in 1096, was the only one to achieve its primary goal, capturing Jerusalem in 1099 after a brutal siege. But don't get too cozy with that victory. It's a long way off, and you're stuck in the early days, where enthusiasm far outstrips organisation. Nobody seems to know who's in charge. Is it that pompous noble on the horse, barking orders? Or the wild-eyed monk claiming God speaks through him? You overhear a knight muttering about the People's Crusade, a disastrous prelude where untrained peasants got slaughtered by the Seljuks. Great, you think. That's the vibe we're working with. Quirky tidbit. Some crusaders believed divine intervention would guide them, like the time a goose was declared a holy messenger in 1096. Yes, a goose. Crowds followed it, convinced it was God's GPS, until it waddled into a ditch and the hype fizzled. You're dodging these fanatics now, their eyes gleaming with visions of glory while you're just trying not to step on a holy goose feather. Historians still argue whether this fervour was genuine piety or mass hysteria egged on by charismatic preachers. Either way, you're not buying the goose story. You're trudging along, your stomach growling, because nobody thought to pack enough food for this holy road trip. The nobles up front have wine and bread, but you're lucky if you snag a handful of stale barley. The path to Constantinople is no picnic. Bandits lurk in the hills, and local villagers aren't exactly thrilled to see an army of foreigners stomping through. You pass a burned-out village, the charred timbers still smouldering, and wonder if it was raiders or overzealous crusaders who did this. A grizzled pilgrim next to you mutters about God's will, but you're starting to think God's will smells a lot like chaos. Every step feels heavier, not just from the mud, but from the weight of what you're walking into. You hear whispers of distant battles, of cities like Antioch and Jerusalem that sound more like myths than destinations. The guy next to you, a wiry peasant with a pitchfork, brags about slaying infidels for glory, but you notice his hands shake when he talks. You're not sure if it's fear, or the fact that he hasn't eaten in days. Either way, you're keeping your distance. A light chuckle escapes you when you spot a knight trying to fix his dented helmet with a rock, medieval DIY at its finest. But the laughter fades as you pass a group of pilgrims praying over a sick child, their voices soft and desperate. Disease is already creeping through the ranks, and you're painfully aware that clean water is a fantasy. You splash through a stream, hoping it's not as bad as it smells, and wonder how anyone survives this. Spoiler: most don't. The First Crusade's success came at a cost. Tens of thousands died before ever seeing Jerusalem. You're not just walking, you're dodging chaos at every turn. A fight breaks out over a stolen sack of grain, and you duck as a fist swings too close. The crowd's mood swings between hope and despair, and you're caught in the middle, trying to figure out how you ended up here. Maybe it's the promise of salvation, or maybe you just got swept up in the mob. Either way, Constantinople is still days away, and you're already dreaming of a hot bath and a world where geese aren't divine. For now, you keep moving, one muddy step at a time, into a world that's equal parts holy and horrifying. You're still trudging through the chaos of the First Crusade, but now you're stuck in a grimy Crusader camp just outside Constantinople, where the air reeks of unwashed bodies and despair. The sun's beating down, turning the ground into a dusty haze, and you're surrounded by tents that look more like tattered rags than shelter. You're trying to find a spot to rest, but every corner of this camp is a reminder that medieval hygiene is a nightmare you can't wake up from. The smell hits you first: sweat, rotting food, and something worse you don't want to name. You're already regretting that stream water you drank yesterday, because your stomach's churning, and you're pretty sure it's not just nerves. This camp is a sprawling mess of knights, pilgrims, and hangers-on, all crammed together like sardines in a tin you wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. You sidestep a pile of what you hope is just mud, but the stench suggests otherwise. Mainstream fact: medieval sanitation was practically non-existent, with open latrines and garbage heaps breeding disease faster than you can say dysentery. The Crusaders didn't exactly pack soap, and clean water is rarer than a polite noble. You spot a group of pilgrims washing their faces in a murky puddle, and you wince, knowing that's a one-way ticket to a week of misery. Quirky tidbit: some Crusaders thought bathing was downright unholy, believing dirt protected their souls from sin. You overhear a monk preaching that cleanliness invites the devil, and you can't help but roll your eyes. Your modern brain screams for a shower, but you're stuck in this filth fest. Historians still argue whether this anti-bathing stance was widespread or just the quirk of a few zealous weirdos. Either way, you're not joining the no-wash club. You weave through the camp, dodging a kid tossing out a bucket of slop that splashes too close to your boots. The noise is relentless. Shouts, prayers, the clang of a blacksmith hammering a sword back into shape. You pass a knight scratching at lice under his armour, and you instinctively check your own scalp, praying you haven't picked up any unwanted guests. Spoiler, you probably have. The camp's a breeding ground for fleas, lice, and worse, and you're learning fast that scratching is the Crusaders' national pastime. You find a spot to sit, a rare patch of ground that's only slightly damp, and try to ignore the guy next to you coughing like he's auditioning for a plague. Food's scarce, so you're nibbling on a crust of bread that's more mould than grain. A woman nearby is boiling something that smells like regret, and you're not brave enough to ask what's in it. You overhear her muttering about curing the flux with a paste of herbs and, yep, you heard that right, dung. You gag, remembering that medieval medicine often doubled as a health hazard. The camp's routine is brutal. You're woken at dawn by a horn so loud it feels like it's rattling your skull. You're expected to help with chores, hauling water, mending tents, or, if you're unlucky, digging latrines. You try your hand at carrying a bucket, but the weight makes your arms scream, and you spill half of it when a horse nearly tramples you. A nearby squire laughs, calling you soft as a Saracen silk, and you force a chuckle, though you're tempted to dump the rest of the water on his head. Speaking of Saracens, the camp's abuzz with talk of the enemy. You hear wild stories, some say they're 10 feet tall, others swear they eat babies. You're skeptical, but the fear in people's eyes is real. You catch a glimpse of a knight polishing his sword, muttering prayers for victory, and you wonder if he's more scared of the enemy or the dysentery that's already taken half his friends. You're not laughing now. The reality of this camp is sinking in, and it's grim. You try to stay positive, but the filth is everywhere. Your clothes are stiff with dirt, your skin itches, and you're pretty sure that rash on your arm isn't just from brushing against a tent. You spot a group of women boiling laundry in a cauldron, but the water's so brown it's more like stew than wash. You make a mental note to avoid that stream they're using. A kid runs by, barefoot and caked in mud, and you can't help but smile. He's got more energy than you've had all week. But then he trips into a pile of who knows what, and your smile fades. The camp's hierarchy is clear. Knights and nobles get the best tents, the least mouldy food, and the closest thing to privacy. You're just a nobody, so you're stuck sleeping on the ground, praying it doesn't rain. You overhear a noble complaining about his foul bedding, and you bite back a sarcastic remark about your own luxurious patch of dirt. The gap between rich and poor is stark, and you're definitely on the wrong side of it. As night falls, the camp quiets, but not in a peaceful way. The air's thick with the drone of prayers and the occasional groan of someone who ate the wrong stew. You lie back, staring at the stars through a gap in the tent above you, and wonder how anyone survives this. The answer is, most don't. Disease and malnutrition claim more lives than any sword. You pull your cloak tighter, trying to ignore the itch crawling up your leg, and dream of a world with soap, running water, and a distinct lack of holy geese leading armies. You've barely survived the stench of the Crusader camp, and now you're thrust into the life of a knight, strapping on armour that feels like it's trying to crush you into the ground. You're standing in a dusty clearing just outside the camp, the morning sun glinting off a pile of dented chainmail a squire's shoving into your arms. It's heavier than you expected. 50 pounds of iron links that clink with every move, making you wonder how anyone fights in this without collapsing. Your muscles ache just standing there, and you haven't even swung a sword yet. The air's thick with the smell of oiled leather and sweat, and you're already sweating buckets yourself, wondering if knighthood is just medieval CrossFit with worse odds of survival. Mainstream fact: knights in the Crusades were the elite warriors, trained from childhood in combat, horsemanship and loyalty to their lord, but their heavy armour made them slow and vulnerable to heatstroke in the desert. You're learning this the hard way as you fumble with a hauberk, the chainmail shirt tangling around your elbows like a metal snake. A grizzled knight nearby smirks, muttering something about green boys not lasting a day. You want to snap back, but you're too busy trying not to tip over under the weight. Quirky tidbit: some knights carried lucky relics into battle, like a saint's finger bone or a scrap of cloth supposedly from Jesus' robe, believing it'd shield them from arrows. You spot a knight kissing a grimy pouch around his neck, and you can't help but wonder if it's actually just a rock he got scammed into buying. Historians still argue whether these relics boosted morale or just distracted fighters from the very real danger of getting skewered. You're not banking on a holy toenail to save you. You're handed a sword next, and it's not the shiny Excalibur you pictured. It's nicked, heavy, and feels like it's got a grudge against your wrist. The squire shows you how to swing it, but your first attempt nearly takes out a nearby tent pole, earning you a chorus of laughs from the other knights. You force a grin, muttering about beginner's luck, but inside you're panicking. These guys have been swinging blades since they were kids. You're just trying not to chop off your own foot. A quick glance at the training yard shows knights sparring with terrifying precision, their swords clanging like a medieval blacksmith's mixtape. The knight's life isn't just about fighting, though. You're expected to uphold a code. Chivalry, they call it. Loyalty, honour, protecting the weak, blah blah blah. Sounds noble, but you notice the knights around you aren't exactly saints. One's haggling over a stolen horse, another's bullying a peasant for a loaf of bread. You're starting to think chivalry's more of a suggestion than a rule. Still, you're stuck playing the part, so you straighten up, adjust your helmet, which, by the way, smells like someone's been storing cheese in it, and try to look like you belong. Then there's the horse. You're assigned a bony warhorse that looks as thrilled to be here as you are. Mounting it in full armour is like trying to climb a ladder during an earthquake. You finally hoist yourself up, only to realise you have no idea how to steer this thing. The horse snorts, takes 2 steps, and stops to chew on a patch of weeds. A knight rides by, effortlessly controlling his steed, and you catch his eye roll. "Nice try, city boy," he calls, and you laugh it off, but you're secretly praying you don't have to gallop into battle anytime soon. The heat's getting worse, and your armour's turning into a personal sauna. You're chugging water from a skin that tastes like it was filled, from the same puddle you avoided in the camp. Dehydration's a real killer here. Knights dropped like flies in the desert, their heavy gear cooking them alive. You're starting to understand why. You try to adjust your chainmail, but it's rubbing your skin raw, and you're pretty sure you're developing a blister the size of a coin. A squire offers you a strip of padded cloth to wear underneath, but it's so stiff with dried sweat you politely decline. You're also learning the social side of knighthood, which is less noble quest and more high school clique with swords. The senior knights treat you like an intern, sending you to fetch their shields or polish their boots. You grit your teeth, hauling a dented buckler across the camp, muttering about how you didn't sign up for this. But you catch a glimpse of a knight kneeling in prayer, his face serene despite the chaos, and you wonder if there's something to this whole higher purpose thing. Then he stands up, yells at a squire for dropping his lance, and the moment's gone. Night falls, and you're exhausted, your body screaming from the weight of the armour you've been dragging around all day. You collapse onto a straw mat, still wearing half your gear because taking it off feels like a workout in itself. The camp's quieter now, but you hear the distant clang of a hammer fixing someone's breastplate and the low murmur of knights swapping war stories. You're starting to realise knighthood isn't just about glory, it's about surviving the grind, the heat and the constant threat of death. You close your eyes, dreaming of a world where armour comes with air conditioning and horses don't give you attitude. You're no longer just fumbling with a knight's armour. Now you're crouched behind a splintered wooden barricade, the air thick with dust and the distant thud of siege engines pounding a castle's walls. You're stuck in the middle of a gruelling siege, somewhere along the Crusaders' path. Maybe Antioch or Jerusalem, it's hard to tell through the haze of exhaustion. The ground vibrates under you as a massive stone from a trebuchet crashes nearby, spraying dirt into your face. You spit it out, wishing you'd stayed in that filthy camp from earlier because this is a whole new level of misery. The castle looms ahead, its walls cracked but defiant, and you're wondering how long you can survive on dwindling rations and sheer stubbornness. Mainstream fact, sieges during the Crusades, like the one at Antioch in 1097 to 1098, could last months, with attackers and defenders alike facing starvation, disease and psychological collapse. You're feeling that now, your stomach growling as you clutch a stale biscuit that's more rock than bread. The Crusaders around you are gaunt, their eyes hollow, and you're all waiting for the enemy to crack, or for your own side to give up first. The air smells of smoke, sweat, and the faint rot of bodies that haven't been cleared from the battlefield. Quirky tidbit, some Crusaders resorted to eating their own horses during sieges, and there's even a wild story about boiling leather belts for soup. You glance at your own belt, half tempted, but decide you're not that desperate. Yet. Historians still argue whether these extreme measures were common or exaggerated by chroniclers to make the Crusaders seem more heroic. Either way, you're not thrilled about the menu options. You're assigned to a siege crew, which means hauling rocks for the trebuchet, or dodging arrows while reinforcing a battering ram. The ram's a beast, 30 feet of timber that takes 20 men to move, and you're one of them. Your shoulders scream as you push, the ram inching toward the gate while archers on the walls rain arrows like it's their job to ruin your day. One whizzes past your ear and you duck, heart pounding. A grizzled soldier next to you chuckles. First time under fire, eh? You force a laugh, but you're mentally drafting an apology to that horse you called Boney last section. The waiting is the worst part. Sieges aren't all action. They're endless stretches of boredom punctuated by terror. You sit for hours, listening to the creak of siege towers and the shouts of commanders arguing over strategy. You try to nap, but the ground's too hard and nearby soldiers' snoring sounds like a dying boar. You're tempted to nudge him awake, but he's got a dagger the size of your forearm, so you let him snore. Instead, you watch a group of engineers tinkering with a mangonel, a catapult that looks like it could launch a cow if they wanted. You chuckle at the thought, medieval cow tossing, the sport nobody asked for. The defenders aren't making this easy. They pour boiling oil from the walls, and you're grateful you're not near the front lines where men scream as it sears their skin. You hear rumours of Greek fire, a terrifying weapon that burns even on water, and you pray it's just a story. But the fear in the veteran's eyes says otherwise. You're starting to realise sieges are as much about breaking spirits as breaking walls. The Crusaders chant prayers to keep morale up, but you notice the younger ones, like you, are shaking, their faith tested by hunger and the constant threat of death. You're also dodging disease, because sieges are basically petri dishes with extra arrows. The camp behind the barricades is a mess. Latrines overflow, flies swarm, and you're pretty sure that fresh water you drank was a bad call. Dysentery's already making the rounds, and you're trying not to think about the guy who collapsed mid-shift yesterday. You splash your face with what passes for clean water, but it smells like the camp's collective bad decisions. A woman tending a fire nearby offers you a healing broth, but it looks like ditch water with herbs, so you politely decline. The nights are no better. You're curled up under a thin blanket, the cold seeping into your bones while the siege engines creak like ghosts. You overhear a knight whispering about a vision of victory, but you're too tired to care. Your body aches from hauling rocks, your stomach's a knot of hunger, and you're starting to wonder if the castle's defenders are eating better than you. Probably. A stray thought makes you laugh. Maybe they're up there feasting while you're down here dreaming of belt soup. As days drag into weeks, you feel the siege wearing you down. You're not sure what's worse, the hunger, the fear, or the endless waiting. You catch a glimpse of a white flag waving from the castle, and hope flares, but it's just a trick to lure your side closer. An arrow storm follows, and you dive behind a barricade, cursing medieval warfare. You're learning fast that sieges aren't about glory. They're about surviving the grind, outlasting the enemy, and hoping you don't starve before they do. You've barely survived the grinding misery of the siege, and now you're thrust into the snake pit of Crusader politics, where every handshake hides a dagger. You're standing in a cramped tent, the air heavy with the scent of wax from flickering candles and the sharp tang of ink on parchment. Nobles and knights crowd around a rickety table, their voices low but tense, arguing over who gets to lead the next assault, or claim the biggest slice of whatever loot this holy war might yield. You're just a bystander trying to stay invisible, but you can feel the room's undercurrent of ambition and betrayal. One wrong word, and you're pretty sure you'll end up accidentally skewered in the next skirmish. Mainstream fact, the Crusades were riddled with political infighting, with leaders like Bohemond of Taranto and Raymond IV of Toulouse clashing over power and territory, often undermining their own cause. You're watching it unfold now, as a red-faced noble slams his fist on the table, accusing another of hoarding supplies. You're tempted to slip out, but a knight's glare pins you in place, like you're somehow part of this mess. Your modern brain screams for a PowerPoint to sort this out, but these guys settle disputes with swords and grudges. Quirky tidbit, some Crusader leaders sent each other lavish gifts, like falcons or silk, to smooth over feuds, only to plot betrayals days later. You overhear a squire whispering about a noble who gifted a rival a fine horse, then forgot to mention it was half lame. You stifle a laugh, imagining the medieval equivalent of a passive-aggressive email. Historians still argue whether these gestures were genuine diplomacy or just elaborate power plays. You're betting on the latter, especially when you see the fake smiles around the table. You're trying to keep up with the players in this game. There's the grizzled commander with a scar across his cheek, barking about his divine right to lead. Next to him, a younger noble, all charm and sharp eyes, nods along, but you catch him slipping a note to a squire. You don't need to read it to know it's trouble. Then there's the bishop, draped in robes that probably cost more than your village, preaching unity while his fingers twitch toward a gold ring. You're starting to realise Crusader politics is less about faith, and more about who gets the biggest castle when this is over. Your job apparently is to carry messages between these scheming lords, which feels like volunteering to walk through a lion's den with a stake tied to your neck. You're handed a sealed scroll and told to deliver it to a knight across camp. The path takes you through muddy lanes, past soldiers grumbling about unpaid wages and peasants praying for salvation. You dodge a cart of rotting cabbages, someone's idea of dinner, and nearly trip over a stray dog that's smarter than you for avoiding this mess. You mutter a joke to yourself about needing a medieval LinkedIn to navigate these alliances, but the humour fades when you hand over the scroll and the knight's glare makes you wonder if you're delivering his death warrant. The camp's buzzing with rumours of betrayal. You hear whispers that one leader's planning to sneak off with his men to claim a nearby city for himself, leaving the rest of you to rot in the siege. Another story claims a noble bribed a scout to exaggerate enemy numbers, hoping to scare off a rival. You're not sure what's true, but the tension's thick enough to choke on. You pass a group of knights swearing loyalty to their lord, but their eyes dart like they're already planning their exit strategy. You're learning fast that trust here is as rare as clean water. Even the church isn't above the game. You spot a priest blessing a noble's sword, but later, you overhear him negotiating a cut of the spoils for his monastery. You can't help but chuckle. Medieval crowdfunding, but with more guilt trips and fewer perks. Your amusement fades when you're roped into guarding a supply tent, a job nobody wants because it's a magnet for thieves and desperate soldiers. You stand there, clutching a spear you barely know how to use while shadows move in the dark. You're pretty sure that Russell wasn't the wind, but you're too tired to care. The worst part? You're starting to see how these power plays affect the little guys. A peasant family huddles nearby, their faces gaunt from hunger because some noble diverted their rations to his own men. You want to help, but you've got nothing to give except a sympathetic nod. The nobles don't care. They're too busy plotting who gets to plant their flag on the next conquered wall. You're beginning to wonder if this holy war is just a land grab with extra prayers. As night falls, you're back in the tent, the candlelight casting long shadows as the arguments drag on. You're exhausted, your feet sore from running messages, your head spinning from trying to track who's allied with who. You collapse onto a straw mat. the distant clink of armour and murmur of plots lulling you into an uneasy sleep. You're dreaming of a world where politics involves ballots, not blades, and where you don't have to dodge a knife just for delivering a letter. You've escaped the backstabbing politics of the Crusader camp, but now you're trudging through a sun-scorched desert, your boots sinking into sand that feels like it's been baked in an oven. The horizon shimmers with heat, and you're part of a long, ragged line of Crusaders marching towards some distant holy city. Jerusalem, maybe, though nobody's sure how far it is. Your throat's dry as parchment, your lips cracked, and the water skin slung over your shoulder is depressingly light. The air smells of dust and desperation, and you're starting to think that holy war sounds better in sermons than it feels under this relentless sun. Remember that lice-infested camp? You're almost missing it now. Mainstream fact. The Crusaders' desert marches, like those during the First Crusade, were brutal, with heat stroke and dehydration killing as many as enemy ambushes, especially on routes through Anatolia and the Levant. You're feeling it now, each step a battle against the sand that creeps into your boots, and the sun that turns your chainmail into a personal furnace. You're not even a knight, just a foot soldier, so you're lugging a spear and a pack that feels heavier with every mile. Quirky tidbit. Some Crusaders believed mirages were divine visions, with stories of soldiers chasing heavenly cities in the desert, only to find more sand. You spot a shimmering lake ahead, and feel a flicker of hope, but a veteran nudges you, chuckling. "It's just the devil's trick, lad." You laugh it off, but you're half tempted to sprint toward it anyway. Historians still argue whether these mirages fueled morale or just drove men mad. You're leaning toward madness, especially as the sand stings your eyes. You're marching with a motley crew, knights on wheezing horses, pilgrims clutching crosses, and peasants like you, who look like they regret signing up for this divine road trip. The guy next to you, a wiry farmer with a sunburned nose, keeps muttering prayers, but you notice he's eyeing your water skin like it's gold. You clutch it tighter, not because you're selfish, but because you're pretty sure he'd trade his soul for a sip. Water's the real currency out here, and you're learning to guard it like a dragon hoards treasure. The heat's not the only enemy. You hear shouts up ahead, Seljuk archers maybe, or bandits who know a tired army is easy pickings. You grip your spear, heart pounding, but it's just a false alarm, some idiot mistaking a dust cloud for an attack. You chuckle nervously, joking to the farmer about needing a medieval radar system, but he just stares blankly. Humour's a tough sell when everyone's too parched to think. Still, you keep moving, because stopping means baking in place, and you're not ready to become a human jerky strip. Supplies are dwindling. You're down to a handful of dried figs and a crust of bread that's more grit than grain. You try to chew slowly, but the sand in your mouth makes every bite a crunchy ordeal. You overhear a knight complaining about his meagre rations, and you roll your eyes. His squire's carrying a sack of wine while you're dreaming of a puddle that doesn't taste like despair. The nobles ride ahead, their banners drooping in the heat, while you slog through their dust. You're starting to see why the peasants back in camp grumbled about the lords. Night brings no relief. The desert turns cold, and you're shivering under a thin cloak, the sand still warm under your back but offering no comfort. You hear wolves howling in the distance, or maybe it's just the wind, but you're too tired to care. You're supposed to stand watch later, but your eyes are heavy, and the stars above blur into a hazy dream. A pilgrim nearby starts singing a hymn, his voice cracked but earnest, and you almost join in, if only to stay awake. Instead, you mutter a joke about needing a medieval sleeping bag, but nobody hears it over the wind. The march resumes at dawn and you're back to trudging, your legs screaming with every step. You pass a fallen horse, its rider nowhere in sight, and you wonder if he wandered off chasing a mirage or just gave up. The thought chills you more than the night air. You're starting to understand the desert's real weapon. It doesn't just kill you, it wears you down until you forget why you're here. Faith, glory, salvation. It all feels distant when your tongue's stuck to the roof of your mouth. You catch a glimpse of green on the horizon. An oasis, maybe. Or another cruel mirage. The column buzzes with hope, but you're sceptical, remembering that farmer's warning. Still, you keep moving, one blistered foot in front of the other, because stopping isn't an option. You're not sure if it's courage or just stubbornness, but you're clinging to it, dreaming of a world with shade, clean water, and a distinct lack of sand in your everything. You've staggered out of the blistering desert, sand still clinging to your clothes, only to find yourself in a muddy village caught in the Crusades' shadow. You're no longer marching with knights or dodging mirages. Now you're a peasant, toiling in the fallout of this holy war. The air smells of damp earth and smoke, and you're knee-deep in a field yanking at stubborn turnips while the distant clang of armour reminds you the Crusaders aren't far off. Your back aches, your hands are blistered, and you're starting to think the desert's heat was almost kinder than this endless grind. The village is a patchwork of thatched huts and hungry faces, and you're just one more soul trying to survive the chaos this war's unleashed. Mainstream fact: the Crusades disrupted peasant life across Europe and the Levant, with armies requisitioning crops and livestock, leaving villages like yours starving or abandoned. You're feeling it now, as you glance at a field stripped bare by passing Crusaders who took every grain and goat they could find. Your stomach's a knot, and the meagre turnip in your hand is your dinner, if you're lucky. The Lord's men keep demanding more taxes to fund the war, and you're wondering how you're supposed to pay with nothing but dirt and resentment. Quirky tidbit: some peasants believed Crusaders' relics, like a saint's bone, could bless their fields if buried in the soil. You overhear a neighbour whispering about hiding a holy splinter in his barley patch, hoping for a miracle crop. You smirk, thinking it's more likely to grow splinters than barley. Historians still argue whether these rituals were acts of faith or desperate superstition born of hardship. You're not burying anything except your hopes for a decent meal. You're up before dawn, hauling water from a well that's more mud than liquid. The bucket's heavy, and your arms scream as you drag it back to a hut that's barely standing. The roof leaks, the walls are drafty, and you're sharing the space with a family of 5, all eyeing your turnip like it's a feast. You try to share, but there's not enough, and the kids' hungry stares hit harder than any noble's tax demand. You mutter a joke about needing a medieval food truck, but the grim faces around you don't crack a smile. Humour's a luxury when survival's on the line. The village is a mess, caught between Crusader demands and local bandits who've gotten bold since the war drained the militia. You spot a broken cart by the road, looted by someone who didn't care that it was a family's last hope. You're tasked with repairing it, but the wood's rotted, and your only tools are a rusty hammer and sheer willpower. A passing pilgrim offers a blessing in exchange for a crust of bread, but you're not trading your last bite for prayers. You nod politely, then hammer harder, wishing you could fix this whole war-torn world as easily. The Crusaders' presence is a constant shadow. You hear their horns in the distance, and every so often a knight rides through, demanding supplies or conscripts. You keep your head down, hoping they don't notice you're strong enough to swing a sword, or weak enough to be disposable. The village elder warns everyone to hide their daughters, and you feel a chill, realizing this war's dangers aren't just on the battlefield. You're starting to see why some peasants flee to the hills, choosing banditry over this slow starvation. Night falls, and you're huddled by a weak fire, the smoke stinging your eyes as you chew that sad turnip. The village is quiet, but it's not peaceful, just exhausted. You hear a mother singing softly to her kids, trying to drown out the distant rumble of siege engines. You're bone tired, but sleep's hard when your stomach's empty and the cold seeps through the hut's cracks. You chuckle quietly, thinking how your modern self would kill for a pizza delivery right now. But the thought fades as you realise tomorrow's just more of this: work, hunger, and the Crusades' endless demands. The worst part is the helplessness. You're not fighting for glory or salvation. You're just trying to keep your family fed while the world burns around you. You hear rumours of villages razed for refusing to supply Crusaders, and you wonder if yours is next. The Lord's castle looms on the hill, its walls untouched by the war's chaos, and you grit your teeth, knowing he's eating better than you'll ever dream. You're learning fast that the Crusades aren't just about holy cities, they're about who pays the price, and it's always people like you. You lie back on a straw mat, the fire's embers glowing faintly, and stare at the sagging roof. The war feels far away, yet it's everywhere. In the empty fields, the hungry eyes, the fear that tomorrow might be worse. You're dreaming of a world with full harvests and no knights demanding your last scraps, but for now, you're just a peasant, clinging to the hope that you'll outlast this holy mess. You've dragged yourself out of the peasant's muddy grind, but now you're swept up in the feverish pulse of a Crusader pilgrimage, surrounded by zealots whose eyes burn with divine purpose. You're walking a crowded road toward Jerusalem, the air thick with dust and the drone of prayers, your feet sore from days of marching. Pilgrims clutch crosses and tattered banners, their voices rising in hymns that clash with the clank of nearby knights' armour. The smell of incense and sweat hangs heavy, and you're caught in a tide of devotion so intense it feels like it could ignite the dry grass underfoot. This isn't just a march, it's a frenzy, and you're wondering if faith this fierce is a spark of hope or a recipe for disaster. Mainstream fact: religious zeal drove the Crusades, with preachers like Peter the Hermit rallying thousands to join the First Crusade, fueled by promises of salvation and divine favour. You're seeing it now as a wild-eyed pilgrim beside you shouts about visions of angels leading the way. His fervour is contagious, but you're keeping your distance. He's also swinging a staff like he's ready to smite anything in his path, including you. Your modern skepticism makes you question if this is faith or just heatstroke talking. Quirky tidbit: some pilgrims believed eating a handful of Jerusalem soil would guarantee them heaven, leading to dirt-munching frenzies when they reached the Holy Land. You overhear a woman boasting she's got a vial of sacred dust tucked in her cloak, and you bite back a laugh, imagining her disappointment when it's just plain old dirt. Historians still argue whether these acts were spiritual devotion or collective madness spurred by years of preaching. You're not eating dirt, but you're starting to feel the crowd's manic energy pulling you along. You're trying to keep your head down, blending in with the pilgrims, but it's hard when everyone's shouting about miracles. A man claims he saw a cloud shaped like a cross, and now half the group's praying toward the sky. You squint up, seeing nothing but a vague puff, and mutter a joke about needing a medieval meteorologist to sort this out. Nobody laughs, they're too busy chanting. You're not sure if you're more annoyed by their blind faith or jealous of their certainty. Either way, you're stuck in this human wave, carried forward by their momentum. The road's a mess, littered with abandoned carts and the bones of those who didn't make it. You step over a cracked sandal, wondering about its owner, and feel a pang of guilt for your earlier sarcasm. These people aren't just fanatics. They're desperate, leaving homes and families for a promise of salvation. You pass a woman kneeling by a makeshift shrine, her hands trembling as she prays for her sick child back home. You want to offer comfort, but what can you say? Your water skin's nearly empty and you're as lost as she is in this chaos. The knights aren't helping. They ride ahead, barking orders, but you notice they're quick to shove pilgrims aside when the road narrows. One pilgrim, a scrawny teenager, gets knocked into the dust by a horse's flank, and you help him up, earning a grateful nod. He whispers about joining the crusade to erase his sins, and you wonder what a kid like him could have done to feel so guilty. The weight of this war's promises, forgiveness, glory, heaven, is crushing everyone, and you're starting to feel it too. Night falls, and the pilgrims light fires, their songs softer now but no less intense. You're sitting on a rock, your legs aching, trying to ignore the hunger gnawing at your gut. A preacher starts ranting about the end of days, and the crowd hangs on his every word even as you roll your eyes. You overhear a debate about whether a wound's pus is good or bad, and you want to scream that it's definitely bad, but you're just a helper, not a scholar. You notice a knight clutching a relic, a supposed saint's tooth like it's his lifeline. You wonder if it's helping more than the spiderwebs. Probably not. Night falls, and the tent quiets, save for the groans and the occasional prayer. You're exhausted, your hands stained with blood you're not sure how to clean off. You slump against a pole, the flickering torchlight casting shadows that look like ghosts. You're dreaming of a world with sterile bandages and painkillers, not leeches and prayers. For now, you're stuck here, surrounded by suffering, hoping you don't end up on one of these cots yourself. You close your eyes, the surgeon's blade still glinting in your mind, and pray you never need his help. You've stumbled out of the blood-soaked field hospital, the screams of the wounded still ringing in your ears, only to find yourself in a crusader camp where hunger is the real enemy. You're standing in a muddy clearing, clutching a chunk of bread so hard it's more grit than grain, surrounded by gaunt faces eyeing your meagre ration like it's a king's feast. The air smells of smoke and decay, with a faint whiff of something boiling that you hope isn't another horse. The siege you survived earlier has left supplies thinner than a pilgrim's patience, and you're learning fast that starvation is as deadly as any sword. Your stomach growls louder than the distant war drums, and you're wondering if you'll make it through the week without eating your own boots. Mainstream fact: food scarcity during the Crusades, especially during sieges like Antioch in 1098, forced Crusaders to ration mouldy bread and slaughter livestock, with some resorting to eating grass or worse. You're feeling it now. You ration a crumbling biscuit that tastes like it's been buried since the last Holy War. You're supposed to share it with the guy next to you, a scrawny squire who looks like he's already half starved, but your fingers tighten around it instinctively. Quirky tidbit. Some Crusaders believed fasting was a holy act, claiming starvation brought them closer to God, though you suspect it was just a way to cope with empty pantries. You overhear a monk preaching about the spiritual benefits of an empty stomach, and you mutter a joke about how your stomach's feeling pretty divine already. Historians still argue whether this fasting was genuine piety or a desperate spin on hunger. You're not buying the holy angle, especially when you see the monk sneak a sip of wine behind a tent. You're tasked with guarding a supply cart, a rickety thing holding a few sacks of barley and some questionable dried fish. It's a high-stakes job. Soldiers have been flogged for stealing a handful of grain, and you're not keen on joining them. You stand there, spear in hand, eyeing every passerby like they're a potential thief. A kid darts too close, and you bark at him to scram, feeling like a jerk when you see his hollow cheeks. You toss him a crumb, hoping nobody saw, and wonder how this war turned you into someone who hoards mouldy bread. The camp's kitchen is a grim spectacle. You pass a cauldron where a cook's stirring something that looks like mud with bits of bone. You're offered a ladleful, but the smell, rotten fish and despair, makes you gag, and you decline, muttering about saving it for later. The cook shrugs, used to rejection, and you chuckle, thinking how even a medieval food critic would give this place 0 stars. But the humour fades when you see a line of pilgrims waiting for their share, their hands trembling as they clutch chipped bowls. Hunger's changing people. You notice fights breaking out over scraps. A knight shoves a peasant for a half-rotten apple, and you step back, not wanting to get caught in the fray. You're starting to see why some soldiers desert, slipping into the night with stolen rations. You're tempted yourself, but the thought of facing bandits or wolves out there keeps you rooted. Besides, you're not sure you'd survive long without the camp's meagre protection, even if it comes with a side of starvation. The nobles, of course, are eating better. You spot a lord's tent where the smell of roasted meat wafts out, mocking your empty stomach. You grit your teeth, remembering the peasant village you toiled in, stripped bare for these same lords. You're learning that the Crusades' holy mission doesn't extend to sharing the good stuff. A squire brags about his master's wine stash, and you joke about needing a medieval heist to steal a sip, but he just glares, clearly not in on the humour. Night falls, and you're huddled by a dying fire, nibbling your biscuit crumb by crumb to make it last. The camp's quiet, save for the grumbling of stomachs, and the occasional sob from someone who's given up hope. You chuckle quietly, thinking he'd fit right in on a modern doomsday podcast, but the humour fades when you see the fear in people's faces. They believe this is their last chance to save their souls, and you're not sure whether to pity or envy them. The zeal isn't just inspiring, it's dangerous. You hear stories of pilgrims turning violent, attacking heretics, or locals they suspect of disloyalty. You pass a burned-out hut, its owner nowhere in sight, and wonder if it was zealots, or just bandits taking advantage of the chaos. Either way, this holy fire's burning more than just hearts. It's tearing through everything in its path. You're learning fast that faith can be a weapon, and you're not sure if you're more scared of the enemy or the fanatics you're marching with. You lie back, the ground hard under your cloak, and stare at the stars through the smoke of dying fires. The hymns fade into murmurs, but the energy lingers, a restless hum that keeps you awake. You're dreaming of a world where faith doesn't demand blood, where you can walk a road without dodging zealots or bones. For now, you're just another pilgrim, carried by a tide of devotion you don't fully understand, hoping you can keep your head above it. You've stumbled out of the fervent pilgrim throng, still reeling from their wild-eyed zeal, only to find yourself in a Crusader field hospital, if you can call a sagging tent filled with groans and the stench of blood a hospital. You're standing amid rows of wounded soldiers, their bandages soaked and their faces pale, while a so-called surgeon sharpens a blade that looks more suited to butchering than healing. The air's thick with the smell of herbs, sweat, and something sharp you'd rather not identify. You're here to help, maybe fetch water or hold a writhing patient down, but every step through this grim tent makes you wish you were back dodging desert mirages. Your modern stomach churns, You're not cut out for medieval medicine's brutal reality. Mainstream fact: medieval medicine during the Crusades relied on crude techniques like cauterizing wounds with hot irons, or using herbs with little understanding of infection, leading to high mortality rates. You're watching it now as a surgeon pours wine on a knight's gashed leg, claiming it'll cleanse the spirits. The knight's screams suggest otherwise, and you're gripping a bucket of murky water trying not to gag. You're supposed to mop his brow, but you're more worried about what's in that water than the wound itself. Quirky tidbit: some Crusader medics use spider webs as bandages, believing they had mystical healing powers. You spot a monk carefully pressing a cobweb onto a soldier's cut, muttering prayers, and you can't help but smirk. Your modern self knows it's probably just a recipe for infection. Historians still argue whether these odd remedies were based on folk wisdom or pure desperation. You're betting on desperation, especially when you see the monk follow up with a tonic that smells like fermented regret. You're handed a rag and told to clean a wound, but the soldier's arm is a mess of blood and dirt, and you're no doctor. You dab gently, wincing as he curses in a language you barely understand. The surgeon barks at you to work faster, but you're distracted by a guy in the corner getting his broken leg set with a stick and some rope. His howl echoes, and you mutter a joke about needing a medieval Yelp review for this place. Nobody laughs. They're too busy praying or screaming. You're starting to think the real miracle is surviving the cure. The tent's a chaos of makeshift fixes. You see leeches applied to a knight's swollen foot, a concoction of garlic and dung smeared on a chest wound, and a priest waving incense over a feverish boy, claiming it'll drive out demons. You're tempted to ask if the demons are causing the smell, but you keep quiet, not wanting to be the next one exorcised. The wounded keep coming, arrow wounds, sword slashes, or just men collapsing from the dysentery you dodged back in the camp. You're learning fast that the battlefield's only half the fight. This tent is where hope goes to die. You step outside for air, but the stench follows you. A woman tending a fire offers you a sip of her healing brew, but it looks like swamp water, so you decline with a forced smile. She shrugs, muttering about weak faith, and you chuckle, thinking how your faith's in antibiotics, not boiled weeds. Back inside, you're roped into holding a soldier's shoulders, while the surgeon saws off a mangled finger. The man's eyes lock on yours, pleading, and you whisper something about hanging in there, feeling useless. You're not sure if you're comforting him or yourself. The surgeons aren't all quacks. Some know their stuff, like how to stitch a cut or set a bone, but they're fighting a losing battle against filth and ignorance. You hear a rumour that the siege might break soon, with promises of plunder and food, but you're sceptical. Those promises sound like the mirages you chased in the desert. You lie back on the cold ground, the stars above offering no comfort, and dream of a world with full pantries and no lords hoarding the feast. For now, you're just another hungry soul, clinging to a crust and hoping tomorrow's rations don't come with a side of belt soup. You've barely survived the gnawing hunger of the Crusader camp, your stomach still grumbling over that mouldy biscuit when you're plunged into a darker undercurrent of the Holy War, betrayals and broken oaths. You're standing in the flickering shadows of a torchlit meeting just outside the main camp, where whispers of treachery hang heavier than the smoke. Knights and nobles huddle in secret, their faces tense, their hands twitching toward daggers. You're here as a messenger, clutching a sealed letter you're afraid to deliver, because every word you overhear feels like a step closer to a blade in your back. The air smells of damp earth and mistrust, and you're starting to think the enemy's arrows might be less dangerous than the allies around you. Mainstream fact: betrayals were rampant during the Crusades, with leaders like Bohemond of Taranto and Raymond IV of Toulouse often prioritizing personal gain over unity, as seen in their squabbles over Antioch's control in 1098. You're witnessing it now, as a knight with a scarred face accuses another of selling siege plans to a rival lord. You're supposed to run their messages, but you're frozen, wondering if the letter in your hand is proof of treason or just another noble's grocery list. Either way, you're not thrilled to be the errand boy in this den of wolves. Quirky tidbit: some knights swore elaborate oaths on relics, only to break them faster than you can say, Holy Cross. You overhear a squire snickering about a lord who vowed loyalty on a saint's knucklebone, then snuck off to negotiate with the enemy for a bigger castle. You chuckle, thinking it's like a medieval pinky swear gone wrong, but the squire's nervous glance reminds you that joking about betrayal could get you in trouble. Historians still argue whether these broken oaths were driven by greed or survival instincts in a chaotic war. You're betting on greed, given the glint in these nobles' eyes. You're sent to deliver that letter to a knight across camp, weaving through dark paths where every shadow feels like a spy. You pass a group of soldiers muttering about a lord who abandoned his men mid-battle to secure a trade deal with local merchants. The betrayal cost lives, and you see the anger in their eyes, the kind that could spark a mutiny. You grip the letter tighter, your palms sweaty, and wonder if you're carrying orders that'll get someone killed, or worse, get you blamed. You mutter a joke about needing a medieval whistleblower hotline, but the wind swallows your words. The camp's a maze of divided loyalties. You spot a noble slipping coins to a scout, probably bribing him to exaggerate enemy numbers and scare off a rival. You're not surprised. Remember those political games in the tent. This is just the next level, where promises of loyalty are as flimsy as the tattered banners overhead. You deliver the letter, and the knight's cold stare makes you wish you'd stayed in the peasant village, turnips and all. He rips it open, scans it, and mutters something about traitors, and you're out of there before he decides you're part of the plot. Back in the main camp, you hear rumours of a bigger betrayal. A Crusader leader negotiating with the Seljuks to hand over a city in exchange for safe passage. The soldiers around you are furious. Their trust in their commanders crumbling like that stale bread you choked down. You're starting to see why the Crusades dragged on. Half the time, the Crusaders were fighting each other, not the enemy. You pass a priest preaching about unity, but even he's got a shifty look, like he's hiding a deal of his own. You chuckle, imagining him selling holy relics to fund his next scheme, but the humour fades when you realise how deep the mistrust runs. Your next task is guarding a supply tent, again, because apparently you're the camp's go-to for thankless jobs. You stand there, spear in hand, watching for looters, but you're more worried about the knights inside whispering about who's next to be sold out. You overhear a plan to sabotage a rival's siege engine, and you're not sure if it's treason or just business as usual. Either way, you're keeping your mouth shut. Snitches don't last long here. Night falls, and you're back in the shadows, the camp quiet but not calm. The torchlight dances on the tents, and you hear a distant argument. Another oath broken, another alliance shattered. You're exhausted, your nerves frayed from dodging intrigue all day. You can't help but chuckle. Medieval crowdfunding, but with more guilt trips and fewer perks. Your amusement fades when you're roped into guarding a supply tent, a job nobody wants because it's a magnet for thieves and desperate soldiers. You stand there, clutching a spear you barely know how to use while shadows move in the dark. You're pretty sure that you collapse onto a straw mat, the letter's weight still lingering in your mind, and dream of a world where loyalty isn't a bargaining chip. For now, you're just a messenger, trying to survive a war where the real enemy might be the guy standing next to you. You've slipped away from the treacherous whispers of betrayal, your nerves still jangling from dodging knights with shifty eyes, only to find yourself in a quiet corner of a Crusader camp where women's voices carry softly through the dusk. You're surrounded by the unsung backbone of this holy war. Women who mend, cook, pray, and bear burdens heavier than the armour you fumbled with back in the knight's life. The air smells of stew simmering over a fire and damp wool drying on a line. But there's a tension here, a weight of unspoken struggles. You're helping haul water to a group of women tending the wounded, and you're quickly learning that their role in the Crusades is as vital as any swordswingers, and twice as grueling. Mainstream fact: women played critical roles during the Crusades, not just as camp followers, but as nurses, laundresses, and even occasional fighters, with figures like Eleanor of Aquitaine joining the Second Crusade. You're seeing it now as a woman with calloused hands stitches a soldier's torn cloak, her eyes tired but focused. She barely acknowledges you as you set down the water bucket, her mind on the endless tasks keeping this camp from collapsing. You're starting to realise that while knights get the glory, these women are the glue holding this mess together. Quirky tidbit: some women disguise themselves as men to join the Crusades, either to fight or escape societal constraints, with tales of beardless knights sparking camp gossip. You overhear a washerwoman chuckling about a lad whose high-pitched voice raised her eyebrows at a checkpoint. You grin, imagining the chaos of her reveal, but keep it to yourself. Medieval gender reveals aren't exactly festive. Historians still argue whether these stories were rare anomalies or signs of wider rebellion against rigid roles. You're rooting for rebellion, watching these women work miracles with next to nothing. You're roped into helping with laundry, a back-breaking job that involves scrubbing blood-stained tunics in a stream that's more mud than water. Your arms ache as you wring out a cloth, and the woman next to you, a stern matron with greying hair, corrects your technique with a sharp word. You try a joke about needing a medieval washing machine, but she just snorts, muttering about soft hands. You laugh it off, but you're impressed by her strength. She's been at this for hours, and her pile of clean clothes is twice the size of yours. The women's work never stops. You see them tending fires, stirring pots of thin gruel to feed dozens, or bandaging wounds with scraps of cloth that look suspiciously like old skirts. One woman, barely older than you, is comforting a dying soldier, her voice steady as she recites a prayer. You're struck by her calm, but you notice her hands tremble when she steps away. You want to say something, but words feel useless against the weight she carries. Instead, you haul another bucket, hoping it helps even a little. The camp's dangers hit women hardest. You overhear whispers about knights who take what they want, and the matron warns you to steer clear of certain tents after dark. You're not a woman, but the fear in her voice chills you, a reminder of the village elder's warning to hide daughters. You're starting to see the Crusades' cost isn't just lives lost in battle, it's the quiet suffering of those left to pick up the pieces. You spot a noblewoman riding by, her fine cloak untouched by the camp's grime, and you grit your teeth, knowing she's spared the worst of this. Night falls, and you're sitting by the fire, the women's voices a low hum as they share stories of home. One speaks of a daughter she left behind, another of a husband lost to fever. You're just a helper, but they let you listen, and you're grateful for it. You chuckle softly, thinking how these women could run the whole crusade if given half a chance, but the thought fades as you see their weary faces. They're not here for glory, just survival, same as you. You're learning their strength isn't loud like a knight's or fervent like a pilgrim's. It's in the small acts, stitching, feeding, praying, that keep the camp alive. You lie back on the cold ground, the fire's warmth fading, and stare at the stars through the smoke. You're dreaming of a world where these women get the credit they deserve, where their work isn't buried under the Crusades' bloody banners. For now, you're just a pair of hands, helping where you can, hoping you don't let them down. Section 13. You've left the women's quiet strength behind, their firelit stories still lingering, only to find yourself thrust into a tense encounter at the edge of a Crusader outpost. You're standing on a dusty road where east meets west, surrounded by a wary mix of Crusaders and local merchants. Their voices a jumble of languages you barely understand. The air smells of spices, camel dung and suspicion, as both sides eye each other like rival gangs at a medieval swap meet. You're here to help barter for supplies, clutching a sack of coins you're pretty sure won't buy much. The Crusades aren't just about battles, they're about these uneasy clashes of cultures, and you're caught in the middle, hoping you don't spark a fight by mispronouncing bread. Mainstream fact: the Crusades brought Europeans into direct contact with Muslim and Byzantine cultures, leading to trade, diplomacy and often violent misunderstandings, as seen in the tense interactions during the First Crusade's march through the Levant. You're feeling it now, as a Crusader knight haggles loudly with a turbaned merchant over a sack of dates, his hand resting on his sword hilt. You're supposed to translate, badly thanks to your shaky grasp of the local tongue, and you're sweating, not just from the heat, but from the fear of saying something that'll turn this market into a brawl. Quirky tidbit: some Crusaders were so baffled by Middle Eastern spices that they thought saffron was a magic potion, sprinkling it on wounds or in soup for divine strength. You overhear a soldier boasting about his saffron stew, and you stifle a laugh, knowing it probably cost him a month's wages for a pinch of yellow dust. Historians still argue whether these cultural exchanges sparked curiosity or just reinforced stereotypes. You're leaning towards stereotypes, especially when you see a knight spit out a spiced flatbread like it's poison. You're trying to barter for water and grain, but the merchant's eyes narrow, sensing your desperation. You offer a few coins, and he counters with a price that makes you choke. Apparently water's worth more than gold out here. You try a joke about needing a medieval coupon, but it lands flat, lost in translation. The merchant smirks, tossing in a handful of figs as a gift, but you're pretty sure he's just unloading his worst stock. You take it anyway, because those figs are the closest thing to a meal you've seen since that mouldy biscuit. The cultural gap is glaring. You watch a pilgrim try to pay with a holy relic, A splinter he swears is from the true cross, and the merchant laughs, offering a donkey's tooth in return. The pilgrim's outraged, but you're secretly impressed by the merchant's hustle. You're learning that these locals aren't just background players, they're survivors, navigating the Crusaders' chaos with sharp wits and sharper tongues. You catch a glimpse of a woman in a veil selling herbs, her gaze steady as she dodges a knight's clumsy flirtation. You admire her poise, wishing you had half her nerve. Tensions flare when a Crusader accuses a vendor of shortchanging him. Swords are drawn, voices rise, and you step back, clutching your sack like a shield. A Byzantine trader steps in, calming things with a mix of flattery and free bread, and you're grateful for his diplomacy. You're starting to see how these encounters shape the war. Trade keeps the Crusaders fed, but every deal's a tightrope walk over a pit of mistrust. You mutter a prayer for peace, then chuckle, realizing you're picking up the pilgrim's habits. The market's not all conflict. You see a Crusader boy sharing a sweet with a local kid, their laughter cutting through the tension. It's a fleeting moment, but it gives you hope that maybe not everyone's here to fight. Still, you're wary. Remember those betrayals in the camp? You're not naive enough to think a shared pastry means peace. You pocket your figs, nod to the merchant and head back to the outpost, your head spinning with new words and smells. Night falls, and you're back at the camp. The market's bustle replaced by the hum of prayers and the clink of armour. You're chewing a fig, its sweetness a rare treat, and thinking about the merchant's sly grin. You're dreaming of a world where cultures meet without swords, where you can trade coins for bread without fearing a riot. For now, you're just a go-between, navigating a clash of worlds, hoping you don't trip over your own tongue.